It could include his lieutenants. That could include members of his family. But then there's also the information in the plea agreement that Flynn was in contact with senior transition officials at Mar-a-Lago on the 29th of December about having conversations with Sergei Kislyak. The information says that Flynn phoned down and talked to a senior transition official at Mar-a-Lago to say, I'm going to talk to Kislyak. Should I talk to him about sanctions? And what should I say? Flynn got off that phone call, according to the information, made the call to Kislyak, and then reported back to the transition official what had been said during that conversation. Now, we know, if we were to take the president at his word from a February 17th press conference, that it was not the president who told Flynn to contact the Russians, because the president said, no, it wasn't me who told him to do that, but he was doing his job, and had I thought about it, I would have told him to do it. Now, again, we're taking the president at his word that that's in fact what happened. But who was it from the transition, if not the president, that Flynn was talking to? And that would mean, if you do the timeline, someone else knew exactly what Flynn had talked to Kislyak about before he lied to the vice president. So to me, what we've seen so far in this plea agreement, that is a very, very key issue that we need to get a little bit more clarity on. And those are clearly some of the questions that we'll be asking the president, who's got an Oval Office spray with one of the leaders from Libya coming up. And we'll obviously be in contact with White House officials throughout the day. But that, to me, is the key part of this plea agreement that opens up a whole lot of other questions. Sandra, back to you.
He is the fourth person charged in connection with this Mueller investigation. What can this, or what does this tell us about that investigation going forward?
Well, the fact that none of these charges actually relate to collusion with the Russians is interesting. I mean, we've got plea deals about making false statements in two cases here. We've got indictments about business dealings. But so far, there's nothing in here about somebody colluding with the Russians to influence the outcome of the election. And other than making false statements to the FBI, there's also no indication that anything that Flynn has done even borders on illegality. I mean, talking with the Russian government when you are in the transition team about to take over the administration is not a legal offense. I mean, it's something that you would expect that a transition would do, is make contacts with foreign governments. Now, if you are acting as sort of a parallel government, trying to influence the Russians into doing something while the Obama administration is still in power, well, that could be seen to be, at the very least, bad form and may go beyond that. But there's no suggestion in any of this so far that Flynn did anything illegal other than lying to investigators. Sandra?
Important to make that distinction. John Roberts, thank you for your reporting on this. I'm sure we'll see you again in a bit.
You bet.
All right, Harris.
All right, our Catherine Herridge was the first to alert us to a key section of all of our what we've learned today, and that's that a senior member transition team had direct contact with Russia and others, according to what we're learning today. Catherine Herridge, let's bring her on board right now. Catherine, what is the significance of this, and what's the sourcing that's on the record?
Okay, so Harris, I was in the courthouse and in the courtroom when Mike Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI, and part of that is a long process where the judge makes sure that Flynn really understands the constitutional rights that he's waiving by pleading guilty. And in that process, a member of the government, the prosecution team, said, and it's now in some of the records that have been released by the court, it states very specifically that on or about December 22nd, so really the heart of this Flynn record has to do with these days before and after Christmas, after the election. It says this very senior member of the presidential transition team directed Flynn to contact officials from foreign governments, including Russia. And this had to do with a UN vote and how those countries would vote at the UN on an issue related, to the Middle East. So the question is, who is this very senior official? And as John Roberts just said, there are really only a handful of people who fit into that category. I would just connect a couple of points here. What we learned in the last 10 days is that Jared Kushner was interviewed by the special counsel in November, about 2-3 weeks ago. So you can see that the special counsel has been pulling together people to help build the body of evidence against Mike Flynn. Just a couple of other things, if I could. When you look at these records and it talks about the degree to which Mike Flynn is going to cooperate, it says here he will do so fully and on whatever basis the special counsel requires. Earlier I spoke with someone who's very close to Flynn who said to me he entered into this agreement for a handful of reasons. He was broken financially, he was broken emotionally, and that his family could not face another 2 to 3 years under the sort of the lever of the government in the Russia investigation. And just because he's made a plea agreement today, he's pled guilty, doesn't mean that he's off the hook with the special counsel. In many ways, because he's already admitted to lying, he's under additional scrutiny about the quality and the fidelity of the statements that he makes in the future. And the records are very clear that he cannot refuse to cooperate with the special counsel at this point without facing a penalty. What's typical in these cases is that the deal is off the table here.
Bill, I know you've been covering this all morning long, and with each hour we get so much information with what Catherine just gave us, though, and you may have a question for her. I'm curious to know, Catherine, if you're still with us, how this actually impacts the look now at those senior aides in the transition to Trump. Bill, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, Catherine, I think it's terrific reporting. To boil it down, I think what the White House would argue today is that all this happened post-election. Democrats who have been very critical of this White House prior to the transition process, they're going to argue you're a long way from getting to a final conclusion. And I think at the moment that's kind of where we are right now.
When you look at the records that were released this morning by the government and what you heard in the courthouse behind me, it's clear that Michael Flynn was playing a role as a go-between, sort of operating between this sort of sweet spot with the incoming administration and then also with foreign governments, and specifically what's cited here is contact with the Russian ambassador. One of the central complaints of the Obama administration, which does appear to be borne out by the records today, is that there could only be one administration at a time, there could only be one president at a time, there could only be one administration at the time. And this really goes to their argument that the president's team was really moving very quickly to embrace their new responsibilities, yet may have gotten over the tip of their skis in some respects, because this is not, in the Flynn case with the contact with the transition team at Mar-a-Lago over the Christmas period, this is not a single phone call. This is a reporting back and forth. Here's what we've got. I've talked to the Russians. Here's what they brought back to me. This is what we're taking back to them. So this was a very active back and forth process. It was not a one-off. So when you look at this issue of collusion, I think it becomes a question of whether the glass is half full or half empty. Is this a kind of coordination with the Russians that is out of character for an incoming administration, or is it completely in character, which is what the President Trump's team has maintained so far?
All right, we had on Alan Dershowitz on our network yesterday. I spoke with him, and one of the things he said was that, we need to get ready for some sort of a deal to come from Mike Flynn. He was aware of the financial situation. In fact, today it's being reported that Flynn is looking perhaps to sell his house very quickly because he's out of cash and needs
that's
that.
Confirmed.
Yeah,
that's confirmed.
So
that's confirmed.
What Dershowitz, though, was saying was that he would sort of put him out there to be able to talk about different people, to be able to point to different things. And what I hear you saying, Catherine, is the FBI is going to watch even closer now to make sure that whatever he offers up is absolutely the truth.
Look, Flynn has made this deal, and I spoke with someone close to Flynn after the hearing this morning, and you can't see a plea agreement as putting you in a position of strength. It puts you in a position of weakness in the sense that you must fully cooperate and provide information to the government that they request, because they always have that lever to break the deal, cut the deal, or they have the lever of, when it comes to sentencing, to what degree did your level of cooperation mitigate how much time you will spend in jail or how much money you will have to pay in federal fines. So this is not a day where he's off the hook. This is the day where he's kind of gone down a path where he's under further pressure and further scrutiny. And based on the records that are released, he must fully cooperate. and he must do so in a fulsome way, in an accurate way, and to the best of his ability. So this would take you to not only paperwork, because that's what it says in these records, but it would also take you to individuals as well.
Catherine Herridge, thank you for your excellent reporting on that. I'm sure we'll hear a lot from you the rest of the day. Bill Hemmer, I want to ask you, moving from what this means for the investigation, what this means for Michael Flynn, what does this mean for Donald Trump and the White House?
Great question. I can't answer it. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't think anyone here is. I think Ty Cobb's statement is interesting.
Right.
He is suggesting it's a very isolated matter. I think what Catherine reports on the anguish that Mike Flynn has gone through for the past 11 months, one could argue, is that I think a prosecutor would take his evidence and say, we flipped him. And we'll see what the White House has to say with the defense about that later today. But if you're building a case from a prosecutor's standpoint, this is where you stack things up.
But
where it goes, I've got no idea, and none of us do.
what confuses me is it is not a crime to speak with the Russians. It's a crime to lie to the FBI that you spoke to the Russians, and it's still not clear to me as just a regular citizen how unusual it is to have these conversations with foreign governments, which I think happens all the time. And the other thing I would point out is the only crime we actually do know of is the unmasking of Flynn, which was a crime. Lisa?
Well, now we know lying to the FBI is
Well, and that as well, yes. But aside from that.
And I would just ask this because, Lisa, you and I were talking in the green room before. When you say met with Russians for the transition team is one thing, but if it was talked about the exact UN vote sanctions that we were trying to put forth with regard to Russia, and then there was talk about policy with regard to Israel, there are four things that he's purported to have lied about that he said today, I am guilty of that.
Right.
And so I would want to know legally the texture of those things.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm interested in this as well. And John Roberts and Catherine Herridge sort of touched on it as well. And I think kind of we're sort of questioning the same thing that we're questioning in the sense of clearly we know that transitions teams talk to foreign governments. So at issue is what were those conversations and were any laws broken in those conversations? Catherine had mentioned, depending on how you look at it, obviously Democrats are going to look at it on the collusion front. But I think we're going to learn a lot more about the nature of those conversations in the coming days. And that is where I'm interested in learning more about, because we know that transition teams do have these conversations with foreign governments, and that's not an illegal thing. And actually, it's something that every transition team does. And another issue here as well is Flynn had put in the statement, he talked about this is the best thing for my family. We know that his son was also caught up in this as well. And so I wonder what scrutiny is being placed on his son, and if that was the impetus and part of the reason as well that he came around and wanting to work with Robert Mueller.
Every time we have a transition of power in the United States, when one administration is replacing the other, we can see the pattern that they have. They want to have better relations with Russia.
Right.
Time and again. I don't think the Trump team was any different. And I know for a fact that General Flynn went to the West Wing as National Security Advisor. And part of his strategy was to build a better relationship with Moscow, so you peel Moscow away from its relationship with Beijing. And that was a strategy that was stated on record in the West Wing last January.
So why did he lie about those meetings then?
Well, you're going to have to ask them.
Yeah, right? So I mean, what you're saying is absolutely, those are the facts, but then also the fact is that he admits lying. So
what I'm arguing is that this was part of the Trump policy to build the relationship with Moscow and see if you can
previous
build and forge a
administrations
better
as well.
relationship.
But does anyone else, I wonder how this is going to play with a jury as well, because we know how much credibility does Flynn have? I mean, he's lied about everything under the sun.
Dershowitz says none.
He's lied
He says you put him on the
So-
stand and one side will say this is a guy who can't tell the truth about anything, and then the other side will say, well, he tells the truth about some things.
So is it smart of Mueller to reach some sort of plea deal with him, considering the fact that he's not a very credible source?
I don't know
he's
that
lied
the goal
about
is
everything
to put him
under
on the
the
stand.
sun.
I think the goal is to try to squeeze him just like they did Paul Manafort.
But is that information reliable?
And, they do a no-knock door raid on him, and they just apply pressure. And then this investigation spends all sorts of money and can go in any direction it wants as it applies pressure.
And we know from the reporting that he did speak to some high-level person within the Trump transition team. We don't know who that person is, and if that person has testified that they did or didn't order Flynn to have these conversations. There's that angle. But I would just say on the, taking the legal stuff aside, I'm not a lawyer, politically, what you see happening is the Democrats are really hoping that this is going to taint Trump's campaign or agenda and bring back more of Russia.
We don't know
and
about
we don't
that.
know if that's going to actually have this effect. I don't think it will.
We do know, and we can say that today's movement continues the story.
We are going to get some real legal analysis here with Judge Andrew Napolitano in just a second, but I just wanted to get this in here. Jeff Flake now to vote yes on tax reform.
Oh, my.
This situation.
There's a lot going on today.
This is unbelievable, this drama.
Is.
So let's get to Judge Napolitano, and I will promise you we're also going to get to taxes here. This is a huge day. Can't believe it's a Friday. Judge Napolitano, get in here. We need you to tell us what is going on. What do you make of the latest with this?
Well, I think this is probably the tip of a prosecutorial iceberg, so to speak. It's a nightmare for Donald Trump because General Flynn was his constant companion on foreign policy and national security matters from June of 2015 till the time the president fired him in February of 2017. The downside for the government is that whatever testimony General Flynn provides is coming out of the mouth of someone that the government itself has acknowledged is unworthy of belief because he's pleaded guilty, as we know, to lying to the FBI. The downside to the president is, as one of you was just saying, this keeps the Russian thing, the Russian story, front and center at a time when the president is beginning to move towards the achievement of his legislative agenda.
That's a very good point.
General Flynn probably will be undergoing the process of being debriefed by FBI agents in a painstakingly detailed way in the next couple of weeks. They're looking for evidence that leads to other evidence. By that I mean they're looking for human beings who can testify so that General Flynn doesn't have to testify.
Exactly, because he's been proven not to tell the truth.
Well, correct. You can provide evidence to the government without going on the witness stand, and that's probably the role they see for him.
Hey, Judge, we want to get Lisa Booth in here because she's got a quick question for you.
Hi, Judge.
Lisa.
Hey, Judge. So question for you. We know that transition teams talk to foreign governments. So why does the conversations that Flynn had, why do those conversations matter, and what is at issue with the conversations that he allegedly had?
That's a great question. The conversations that General Flynn had while he was part of the transition team are of far less moment than any conversations he had during the campaign. I mean, at the time of the transition team, one would expect that the Trump foreign policy and national security people would begin to dip their toes in the water, so to speak, particularly after the president is inaugurated, but before there's a new Secretary of State. So what happened during the transition time period, unless it is a cover-up of what happened during the campaign, is far less problematic for the president today than what may have happened during the campaign. The portions of the plea agreement that I have seen go to conversations during the transition period, not during the campaign.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Judge Andrew Napolitano, thank you for jumping on the phone and weighing in. Whether or not Republicans have enough to pass tax reform in the Senate, that has long been a question. Jeff Flake, as I just mentioned, is now a yes. Okay, so we've got a lot going on this busy Friday afternoon. We're going to get to that story on the other side of the break. We'll be right back. Fox News alert, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell telling the AP that, quote, we have the votes to pass tax reform. We are awaiting a floor vote in the Senate expected today. Could come at any time. After some last-minute drama nearly derailed that bill yesterday. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill, where there's nothing going on there, huh, Mike?
Sandra, good afternoon to you. Everybody I've talked to today says they have at least 50 votes, enough to pass tax reform. What is unclear at this point is the timing. The two wild cards in terms of senators were Bob Corker of Tennessee and Jeff Flake of Arizona. Flake is now a yes. He says that he got the leadership to get rid of what he considered a budgeting gimmick, and he got a commitment from the Trump administration and Senate leadership to work on a DACA fix for those children brought to this country illegally. So he is on board. We await an announcement from Senator Corker. Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson tweeted earlier, I'll be voting yes on tax reform. Appreciate Senate leadership and POTUS willingness to work to close the gap between pass-throughs Corporations and C Corps on the business side. There's a lot of work still to reconcile Senate and House bills, and I've been assured a seat at the table during those negotiations. Another Republican confirmed he's a yes first thing this morning on Fox and Friends First.
The outcome here is going to be able for American business to win, creates more jobs. It will raise wages. So this tax plan is going to put more dollars directly in the pockets of hardworking Americans through lower taxes, but it's going to increase wages.
At this stage, we expect action on the Senate floor, voting on a variety of amendments, what they call around here a vote-a-rama. Then ultimately on final passage of the bill, which a number of Republican sources say they will definitely do. The Senate Democratic leader is ripping the tax package.
It's time for my Republican friends to admit the error and come clean with the American people. The fact that we received the dynamic score only a day before a final vote on the bill shows just how foolhardy it is to rush a bill like this through.
The latest guidance I'm getting from key sources is they expect a vote-a-rama sometime later today, and they plan to finish up tax reform tonight. We will see exactly when. Sandra?
All right, Mike Emanuel, thank you for that. At the bottom of Jeff Flake's announcement or statement that he has declared he is in support of this now, having secured both of those objectives. He laid out exactly what he was asking for. I am pleased to announce I will vote in support of the tax reform bill. Breaking
Do we
news.
think it's a good bill?
Well, can I get a question?
Well, let me
Do we know?
I'll frame it. Do we know? And we will not know for some time. I think that is the argument we can have.
Well, I was just going to say that this could move quicker than we think. Everyone's assuming that we're going to go to conference, but it is possible that if they fixed the state and local tax issue, which,
right,
and we know that
which
Senator
Collins told me that they were on the road to doing.
They were on the road doing something Senator Collins was really wanting. What could happen is the Senate passes the bill and the House just accepts it.
Yeah.
And that could move things much quicker because, believe me, the Senate doesn't want to go back and wrangle all these votes again and have any problems.
You know,
so that's a very interesting thing that could happen.
There was a lot of intent and hope built into the explanation of this bill. They intend for the corporate taxes to be reintroduced into American investment. Will it happen?
I believe it.
I don't know.
Well, and there's
I will tell you,
historically it
on
has,
the individual side, just being home last week in Ohio, talking to a lot of family and friends.
Yeah.
I asked every single one of them, what do you think of the tax bill? So few could tell me what's in it for them.
And Bill,
therein, I believe, lies a problem.
You're laying out the other side of this for Republicans as well. When the bill is passed, then they have the job to go and sell it to the people that you're talking about, to sell it to voters in the midterm elections, explain to them how this bill will benefit their lives. And that's not always the easy part.
Small business likes it. They'll tell you they've had
but to the average
strap
American,
of regulation.
The average American is
well, one name comes to
well.
mind when you talk about passing stuff and then finding out what's
Well,
in it.
right, that
Anybody
sounds
wanna
like
guess?
Nancy.
Nancy Pelosi.
That's right.
And so the Republicans don't want to go down that road.
Right.
I think that they have been talking enough about what was in the House and what was in the Senate and their differences for us to at least get a flavor of that. But you're right. If they skip conference, we won't know a lot of what went into
I'll tell you what though.
the changes and the concerns.
But the president and the president has a lot of credibility when he's been out on the stump promoting this tax bill. He has deregulated at a speed that has really jump-started this economy. I think that when the president went out and said to the American people, some people called it a rambling speech. I thought it was a really fun speech to watch that he had this past week in Missouri. But I think that what you're going to see is that the American people go, this guy has got the economy better than it's been in a long time. He says this is going to work, and I think the people believe him.
We all watched for Ron Johnson and Daines and McCain, and I watched for Rand Paul. And remember, from the beginning of this, the president felt confident that he had his vote on tax reform. Rand Paul was the guy who said, if you don't repeal all of it, I'm never, ever, 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 ever going to say yes about Obamacare. He was the person who then said, I don't know about tax reform, but he had him from the get-go.
He flipped on Monday to a yes, and it seems like so long ago.
I feel like I've got the popcorn out watching the
interesting.
horse trading going on over the past 24 hours, and that we'll give you the small business to Ron Johnson, Susan Collins now has power now are asking for, SALT deductions, wanting to put that in play.
But I think Bill,
Senator
Let's
Flake,
hope it all makes it better. Bill asked a reasonable
drilling in
question, though.
Anwar.
yeah, we're seeing all the
How big
things
is this at the
being.
end of the day? Is it, as you've been asking, Bill, the generational tax reform that this president has promised? And what sort of growth are we even talking about here?
We got a scoop, but it's big for the deficit, so that's something else that the Republicans will have to talk about as well.
That's true. Slow news
Got
day.
awfully quiet when I mentioned that word deficit. We are monitoring developments in Detroit. We are awaiting a news conference outside the home of Congressman John Conyers. He's facing calls for resignation over sexual misconduct allegations and some money paid to a woman to keep quiet. Stay close. On a very busy Friday, this Fox News alert, we are awaiting a news conference outside Congressman John Conyers' Detroit, Michigan home after a string of sexual misconduct allegations popped up on Capitol Hill against him. When asked if this will be an announcement about his resignation, a spokesperson says, quote, "That will be addressed," end quote. All this as Conyers and Democratic Senator Al Franken are facing growing pressure to step down over sexual harassment claims. And this is happening as support for Conyers quickly evaporating as 3 of his 4 Democratic colleagues in the Michigan delegation are calling for his immediate resignation. Congressman Dan Kildee, the first Democratic congressman from Michigan to call for Conyers to step down. Watch.
I think Congressman Conyers should resign. No person, no matter where they work, should have to tolerate the kind of harassment that's been alleged.
Also calling for Conyers to go are House leaders Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi, plus Minority Whip Steny Hoyer. And meanwhile, the Senate Ethics Committee has opened a preliminary inquiry into Senator Al Franken of Minnesota, hours after another woman said he groped her. But despite the firestorm, both Franken and Conyers are showing no signs that they are going anywhere. Now, the news conference could change that for Conyers. We'll have to see. But Al Franken now had 65 members of local active politicians in Minnesota, some of them women, saying just a few days ago, defending him. Crickets.
I think it's bigger than Al Franken. I think it's bigger than John Conyers. I think it's a question of how our government is going to right its own ship once it emerges that it's bigger than we even understand. And how you can take taxpayer dollars and make payments on sexual harassment claims.
I want to make a
is
statement
something
about that.
should simply be unacceptable.
It is unacceptable, but I think we also need to take into account that's a $17 million fund. Only one of those cases was a sexual harassment case against a member of Congress, and that was settled for, I think, less than $200,000. So
Who was that?
They haven't said who that person is. But also note, it's not Conyers. Conyers paid for his out of his MRI, which is his member budget, which is totally crazy that happened as well.
So that is that's still taxpayer dollars.
Oh, yes. I don't think that should happen. I'm just saying you see a $17 million fund and you might assume there's been $17 million worth of payments made to...
No, I don't think anybody assumes that, but what we know about that fund is that it deals with all sorts of discrimination.
Yeah,
racial discrimination, sex discrimination. So actually, that actually doesn't make the argument any better for what they need to do to
there shouldn't be
put some sunlight on that. So Congresswoman Blackburn, I think, was with you too this morning, right? And she was part of that bill, that bipartisan bill that they put forth yesterday in terms of exposing some of the names of the people who were using that slush fund for different sorts of things. And that's really when you can do the actual drill down on who paid whom for what and what was really being...
Some of that's leaking right now. You talk to this minute.
Part of the problem is people hear this and it's just like that goes to that trust issue of our government. I mean, you're married to a congressman, and I'm sure you deal with this on a daily basis, but I mean, these are much bigger problems that Americans look at. It's taxpayer dollars. That's one problem. Another problem is they're running the country.
Absolutely. There's a
major trust issue here.
But it's not just trust. I also think it's an issue of fairness, because I think a lot of Americans are saying, if I did some of these things that Representative Conyers is being accused of, I would get the boot from I would be fired from my job. There's no way my career would withstand this scrutiny. So I think there's an issue of fairness at hand. Yeah. And I also think if you look at the Office of Compliance and the barriers that are put up for these women, or, regardless if it was sexual harassment, whatever the incident is involved, as we mentioned, the $17 million, there are various things involved in the claims that were reached. But you look at the barriers put in place. And the deck is stacked against the individuals bringing those accusations. So on Capitol Hill, we are seeing changes. A House resolution passed for training. There's a hearing next week for the House Administration Committee, I believe on Thursday, talking about this as well. So this is going to be an ongoing conversation on Capitol Hill as we will all be listening in the coming days.
So the bigger point, Bill, with regard to the money might be that there was this slush fund out there that would pay for anything the taxpayers wouldn't know about.
A lot of people have come on TV and said they knew nothing about it. Look, this is a sea change in America. It's happening in real time. It was Russell Simmons yesterday. It was Garrison Keillor and Matt Lauer the day before. It was Charlie Rose 10 days ago. Who knows who it might be by 5 o'clock this afternoon and then into the week next week. And it's going to go into, it will go into different sectors of America. And I think collectively how we react to this and how our relationships with each other change perhaps is something that we have to be attentive toward. I know I think about it a lot more just in my interaction with my own colleagues.
You're a complete gentleman, Bill Hemmer.
Yeah, you're such a nice
speak for
person.
that.
Trying to say that, thank you.
But Bill, I've thought about
we're rolling on that too, by the way.
Bill, I've thought about that as a political spouse too. You know, some of this was pictures taking, and I think political people, especially men, are going to have to be more careful about how they take a picture with somebody or what they do, because you don't want to have any
one thing
doubt.
is for sure. As these people come forward, daylight is the greatest disinfectant, right?
Agreed.
So, I mean, we have to follow the stories of these victims as they come through and make sure justice is served. I mean, that's important to do. All right. So, speaking of justice, wow, what a day. General Michael Flynn, former national security advisor for the president, and worked with the team, the transition team, the Trump transition team, has now pled guilty to lying to the FBI on at least 4 different matters having to do with Russia. We're following this today because now it has come out that he is now, in his testimony with the officials, willing to tell a judge and willing to say in court that he was directed to do what he was doing with Russia by members, senior officials among the Trump transition team. And around we go. We're following this. Stay close to Fox News Outnumbered. You're watching it.
After a long fight, the Justice Department releasing documents on the infamous tarmac meeting between former President Bill Clinton and former then Attorney General Loretta Lynch. Documents show DOJ downplaying the meeting. One official reportedly writing, quote, Daily Caller, The Hill, and Fox News have picked up a local Phoenix News report about a casual, unscheduled meeting between former President Bill Clinton and the AG. But the then head of the FBI thought it was much more important than that.
I'm not picking on the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, who I like very much, but her meeting with President Clinton on that airplane was the capper for me. And I then said, you know what? The department cannot by itself credibly end this.
Oh, that meeting. Bill Hemmer is on the couch.
Indeed.
29 pages.
Continues to linger.
Well, they just talked about their grandchildren, right? So it's just
29 pages.
Golf and
grandchildren.
Nice
That
day
is not
out.
a
Yeah.
1-second conversation.
Which, if you play golf with me, is a very short conversation. You know where my game is.
You eagle every hole.
Not even close to that. Look, these records have been kept private for a reason. They don't want a lot of people to know what the Department of Justice is on to here, but we're going to peel this away, and I think in time we'll find out whether or not there was something that led to that whole suggestion about don't call it an investigation, call it a matter.
I love that it was a local reporter. I mean, this wasn't broken by some big, I mean, it was a person on the ground
Happens
from the
more
Phoenix.
than you think.
I know. And it really did change the election in a huge way. I think the credibility of the Clintons was sort of solidified in terms of the people's public opinion, and so much by that meeting, because people could see that is not
The phrase in the documents was find that guy, right?
Yeah.
That guy referring to whomever leaked the story. Was it a reporter there in Arizona, or was it an airport worker? That person has not been identified.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well,
So-
I also just, does anyone else feel like the investigation was just a formality and, the fix was sort of already in? We know that the FBI was dishonest about the documents that they even had from the beginning about the tarmac meeting. We know that Comey testified under oath. He was told to call it a matter instead of an investigation. President Obama went on national television saying that Hillary Clinton didn't put her national security at risk. So, and we also know that the exoneration letter was drafted before he even gave the announcement about Hillary Clinton. So from my vantage point and looking at all this, it really just feels like the investigation was just a formality.
Well, I would say this. I won't
real.
weigh in on the impetus for investigation. You're going to hope that some people were doing their jobs because they should have been. But the very fact that Loretta Lynch has regretted this meeting tells me a whole lot. Right? Yeah. I mean, wished it hadn't happened was kind of what she was getting to. Not only was it inconvenient, but what about her legacy?
I was going to say, it taints her legacy. It really does.
All right. Well, Michael Flynn, the president's former national security advisor, pleading guilty to making false statements to the FBI. This happening just a couple of hours ago. This story continues. A lot of details we still have yet to learn. We'll have more on this story on the other side. Fox News alert on former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn pleading guilty to lying to the FBI about his conversations with Russia's ambassador during the transition period before President Trump's inauguration. As part of the deal, Flynn is agreeing to cooperate with the Mueller investigation. Congressman Adam Schiff, top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, reacting just a short time ago.
If this is the universe of charges that Mike Flynn is pleading guilty to, given the far broader exposure that he had on a variety of other matters, it tells me that he's providing substantial cooperation to Bob Mueller. I don't think we've seen the end of this, but clearly a very significant milestone when the now former National Security Advisor of the United States has to plead guilty to lying to federal authorities.
White House attorney Ty Cobb saying in a statement, nothing about the guilty plea implicates anyone other than Mr. Flynn. What did you make about Schiff there talking about this indicates to him that he's cooperating fully?
He is, I don't know what he knows that we don't know, but Schiff has been on this issue like a dog on a bone for quite some time, even more so than most Democrats. I think what we learned in the past hour that I find is significant is what Catherine Herridge is reporting about how Flynn came under financial and emotional pressure and then finally agreed to, it helped him crystallize his decision. I think the other thing you need to hang on to is more reaction from the White House. Ty Cobb, the attorney this past hour, said nothing about the guilty plea of the charge implicates anyone other than Flynn. So watch to see how that story develops or doesn't.
Schiff hasn't let go of this story because he's from California, where the resistance is from. I think that Democrats are still hoping that this Russia thing is going to bring this president down. I will tell you that I live in the Midwest. I don't think anyone is going to change their opinion based on this. I don't think it makes it so far. There's been no collusion with the president that has come out, and with all the leaks, I think we would have seen something by now.
Well, and Bill, you raised an interesting point because, Flynn obviously mentioned the fact that his family has been under an enormous pressure. There's a huge financial weight to this as well. And there's been other Trump officials or staffers that have said something similar. I forget where the publication was because but one of the staffers had written about the financial implications of even going through this and just the great cost in hiring attorneys and going through this process. And so if you're an average staffer, how do you pay for it? The legal counsel involved in going through the investigation, being questioned by Robert Mueller, the amount of money and financial costs of employing legal counsel is enormous.
Yeah, I was checking to see the president's Twitter account has been pretty quiet throughout the day.
All day?
Well, no, not since this morning, I think was the last. 36 Minutes proclaims World's AIDS Day. Important notice there. Before that, 6 hours ago. So no, he has not reacted on the Twitter.
Just a fine point on your point, Lisa. What he talked about with Catherine was he could not afford a 2 to 3 year court battle. Could not do it.
All right, more Outnumbered in just a moment. I picked a horrible week to give up caffeine. That was personal disclosure, okay? And you will be hosting Fox and Friends this weekend. Rachel Campbell-Duffy, watch her, and Bill Hemmer. We appreciate you jumping in today.
I'll see you Monday.
And Tiger Woods, wow, he's having a good round.
3 under, 600 per tournament, 3 of the day.
Here's Harris Faulkner.
The Washington bombshell right now, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn pleading guilty to lying to the FBI. This is speculation is now building that other shoes may drop. That's the new part of the story this hour. Let's go outnumbered overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. General Flynn pled guilty to federal district court charges that he lied to the feds about his conversations with the Russian ambassador. Flynn is the first Trump administration official and the fourth connected to the campaign to be charged as part of a special counsel Robert Mueller's wide-ranging investigation into possible collusion between Russia and members of Trump's team. We're going to say it early, no evidence of that collusion. And then there's this, in part a quote, "It has been extraordinarily painful to endure these many months of false accusations of treason and other outrageous acts, but I recognize that the actions I acknowledged in court today were wrong, and through my faith in God, I am working to set things straight." That from General Flynn. Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts on the North Lawn. John, we're live right now.
Hey, good afternoon to you, Harris. Sorry, I had somebody in my ear there and couldn't hear you for a second. We got our statement from the White House a little while ago, within the last 90 minutes, from Ty Cobb, who is the president's attorney on the Russia investigation, who's working inside the White House counsel's office. In that statement, Ty Cobb pointing out that Michael Flynn was the national security advisor for a duration of only 25 days, and then going on to say, quote, "The false statements involved mirror the false statements to White House officials, which resulted in his resignation in February of this year," talking about Flynn. "Nothing about the guilty plea or the charges implicates anyone other than Mr. Flynn. The conclusion of this phase of the special counsel's work demonstrates again that the special counsel is moving with all deliberate speed and clears the way for a prompt and reasonable conclusion." But there's something in the information presented today at the federal courthouse that really muddies the waters here. It was a surprise, apparently, to the White House and certainly to the vice president that Michael Flynn had conversations with the then Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak, about Russian sanctions and the expulsion of diplomats and whether or not Flynn encouraged Russia to moderate its response to that. But in the information, it details that Flynn had a conversation with a senior member of the presidential transition team who was at Mar-a-Lago with other members of the presidential transition team, including the president, rather. Flynn asked this senior transition official what, if anything, he should say to Kislyak about sanctions. That transition official, according to the information, said that he should discuss sanctions. Flynn hung up the phone from that call, called Kislyak, talked about sanctions, and urged Kislyak to moderate the Russian response. Kislyak said he would. Flynn then called back down to Mar-a-Lago, talked to that transition official. Then the next day, the Russian President Vladimir Putin released a statement indicating that Russia would not take retaliatory measures against U.S. sanctions at that time. And then President Trump tweeted, "Great move on delay by Vladimir Putin. I always knew he was very smart." So what we're finding out here is that somebody other than Flynn knew about all of that. Was it the president who knew about it, or was it somebody else? Certainly in a press conference that was held in the middle of February, the president denied any involvement when he was asked, "Did you direct Mike Flynn to discuss sanctions with the Russian ambassador?" "No, I didn't. I didn't direct him, but I would have directed him to if I didn't do it." Okay, so the president's saying, Harris, he didn't have anything to do with it, but he thought it was a prudent step to take. And if he had thought about it, he would have told Flynn to do it. So we're doing a lot of digging here to try to find out who that transition official was that Flynn talked to and what the extent of the conversation was between the two of them.
And then other conversations that we know about now that we didn't when they were happening contemporaneously just a few weeks ago. Among the people that Robert Mueller's team has spoken with now about Michael Flynn was Jared Kushner, who works inside the White House, the president's son-in-law. Real quick, just thought about that and what you've been able to find out.
The indications that I'm getting on that is that Mueller was sort of, crossing the T's and dotting the I's to find out if anybody had any exculpatory information about Flynn before he went ahead and he made the charge and then agreed to cut the deal with them. It's like if somebody was holding in their back pocket something that would exonerate Flynn, Mueller wanted to know about it. So that may have just been a little bit of a sweeping up operation, talking to Kushner.
Interesting. John Roberts, thank you very much for bringing us new information this hour. So what will be the political fallout from all of this? My next guest says there is no news here. Let's bring in Fox News contributor and former Trump campaign surrogate Steve Cortes. So, Steve, you say no news here. Well, then what are we talking about? Because you got General Flynn on the record now saying he lied in instances that were important.
Well, listen, here's why I'm saying there's not news. I'm not saying that's not a newsworthy piece of information, but we already knew he lied. We knew he lied to the president, to the vice president.
Right.
That's why he was fired. So the fact that he lied to an FBI agent, if he's willing to lie to the commander-in-chief, his commander-in-chief, certainly he's just as willing to lie to an FBI agent. So I think that Mr. Flynn, look, after a lifetime of protecting and serving this country, including as an Obama official, unfortunately, he really sullied that by making some very unfortunate decisions around the transition time. But the fact that after the election, he lied to FBI agents, he lied to them about what he did after the election. We are still so far away from collusion, and particularly any collusion that is tied directly to the president himself, that it's absurd. So I would say to the liberals out there and the critics of the president who keep calling this a bombshell, this isn't even a firecracker.
It's interesting to hear you say this, because the president on General Flynn last February had this to say.
Because when I looked at the information, I said, I don't think he did anything wrong. If anything, he did something right. He was coming into office. He looked at the information. He said, that's fine. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be, and he didn't just call Russia. He called and spoke to both ways. I think there were 30 some odd countries. He's doing the job.
Steve, you were part of the team. Did you talk with the president or any of his senior officials about this going on? I mean, certainly this investigation has taken a lot of time, a lot of resources, America's tax dollars going forth. Did it ever come up, and what were those conversations like?
No, it did not with me, but Harris, I'm not in the foreign policy wing of, sort of Team Trump, so it's natural that I would not be part of that conversation.
No, but you had to deal with these things as they were popping up as matters and part of the transition team.
Of course. And look, I would say this, too. The president is right that, of course, it's prudent and smart for his future national security advisor to reach out to myriad countries around the world to have conversations about future policy. Now, he shouldn't, because he was the president-elect, he shouldn't undermine then President Obama's policy overseas. So that's certainly someplace you have to be very careful to not skirt that line. So what General Flynn did in terms of outreach, I don't think was wrong. But he lied to the FBI, as he now admits, which was wrong. And more importantly to me, he lied to his superiors at the White House, which again, though, is the reason that he was terminated. But I think, again, there's an obsession with Russia. There's a collusion delusion here. This election was not run because of Russia or because of any foreign country. It was won because of the incredible economic nationalist agenda of Donald Trump. And on the flip side, the terrible, corrupt, unlikable performance and candidate of Hillary Clinton. That's why this was won. Let's stop trying to rewrite history.
One thing going forth, and I know this just from talking with you previously, is that the president has all of these agenda items that he wants to get done right now. You've got a legislative, we're on the precipice perhaps of tax reform. And what do you say about this point with General Flynn and all of this? Do you see this as maybe speeding things up and getting this off the books? I mean, we don't know what Robert Mueller has, but what is the perspective from the White House that you know of from working with this team?
Right. Well, I would say this, that this is part of the problem of a special counsel, and I would say that about any special counsel, even with a Democratic administration as its primary investigative targets, is that it can be open-ending. This can literally go on and on. There's no limit on its budgets. There's no limits on its time frame. So that's part of the problem, and it has been. Look, of course, we have to admit this has been frustrating, and it has been a diversion from what's important for the American people. I think this is important, too, though. While mainstream media and people who live in the Acela corridor, who generally despise Trump, are pretty obsessed with Russia, regular Americans are not. The economy is accelerating. Our border is largely under control. Gorsuch is on the court. Amazing things are happening, and a lot of people appreciate that. And frankly, they don't care a whole lot about the inside baseball of the fact that General Flynn committed a process crime. I'm not excusing it. It's still a crime. He's going to have to pay a price for that. But a process crime, not a crime in action, not anything remotely close to treasonous against the United States. And I'm still confident that in the end, the growth agenda of Donald Trump is going to be so much more important for regular Americans than swamp machinations that at some point even the Democrats are going to tire of this Russia obsession.
Steve Cortes today talking about the politics of the matter. We're going to move on to the legal matter now, but Steve, always good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
for
Harris.
The potential legal exposure for the White House, if there is any, and whether we could see more bold-faced names facing indictments in the Russia investigation. My next guest sees many significant significant developments from Flynn's guilty plea. Tom Dupree served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President George W. Bush. So, Tom, as you look at this, is this a good thing today for the White House or something else, or neutral?
Well, it's hard to spin this as a good development for the White House, but at the same time, I wouldn't overstate the significance of what happened. I don't think it's a shock that Flynn agreed to a deal with Mueller. I think the big question now is what comes next, and specifically, what is Mueller going to get out of Flynn? Because if Flynn doesn't have a lot for Mueller, if he can't implicate the president or other White House officials, then I think that this investigation will come to an end very quickly.
Oh, that's interesting. So you think a lot does hinge then on Flynn in particular, even though that there are a lot of other people in the constellation that Robert Mueller's team has talked with. Why do you say that?
I say that because I think the time is approaching where Mueller is going to have to show his cards. He's been interviewing a lot of different people. He's been gathering information. He's obviously reached deals with a number of people who have been involved in this matter. And I think that at some point, Mueller is going to have to say, I have talked to the key people. I have the information I need, and I'm either going to bring charges against others or I'm going to wrap things up. We've seen in our history that these independent counsel investigations can go on years and years and years. I'm hopeful this is going to be the exception to what we've seen in the past. And we've seen the White House has complimented Mueller on moving with all deliberate speed. I think Mueller is doing that. And my sense is that if Mueller looks at the evidence he has from Flynn and from others and says there's nothing more here, I've indicted the people who have committed crimes, I think he will bring this investigation to a prompt conclusion.
You know, it's fascinating how you're focusing in on Flynn, too, not just because he's making news today, but because you really do feel like he's at the center of where the information nugget might be. Part of that is because he lied to the vice president, he lied to the president, he lied to the FBI. As Steve Cortez just said, he had a little bit for everybody. Alan Dershowitz was on the program yesterday, and I know across the political aisle from you maybe, but you guys seem to agree on maybe what Flynn's attorney knew that he had in his client. Let's watch this.
Flynn's lawyer is a very sophisticated guy who knows how to play the game. He's holding Flynn up there and he's saying, I have a man for sale or for rent. If the government wants him, the prosecutor wants him, hey, we're ready to make a deal. If the president wants him on his side, we're ready to accept a pardon.
You know, Tom, it's interesting because if we really have gotten to that sort of tipping point, I haven't heard anybody else say that until now, that this is actually an indication that things are moving along quickly.
I think it is. Look, Flynn is obviously a central character here. We obviously know that there was concern about Flynn right around the time of the transition. We know that Flynn obviously had a lot of communications with Trump campaign officials and with people in the White House during his very limited tenure there. And I don't think there are that many more people that the special counsel needs to talk to. If he can't get what he needs from Flynn, it's an open question whether he really can get that sort of information from anyone else or whether that information simply doesn't exist.
Yeah, you know where else we sort of heard that from was from the White House about a week and a half or so ago when they said, look, we're getting to the end of that list that they ask us to provide of people to talk to.
Right. And look, Mueller has a list. He's got a list of people he needs to talk to. What we've seen from Mueller so far in this investigation is he is very aggressive. He doesn't play games. He plays hardball when he has to. But he has not been signaling that he plans to string this thing out for 2 or 3 or more years. I think he's got his list. He's working through the list. And once he's got the evidence he needs or sees that evidence is not there, he will bring this to a close.
And you can't bluff with the FBI on this one on the part of Michael Flynn. So what happens if he doesn't hand them a huge whale of information and a smoking gun or whatever it is they say that it will take to move forward on this?
Well, I think Mueller probably already knows largely what he's going to be getting from Michael Flynn. I mean, if we believe what we've seen in the news reports, this has been an ongoing conversation for at least a week, probably a lot more than a week. And I suspect that Flynn has already told Mueller exactly what he has to give him. So I think the next card to be played is Mueller's. And I think we're fast approaching the time when Mueller is going to have to show his hand here.
Okay. Tom Dupree, thank you very much. Good information. Appreciate it. We have much more on this developing story, including new reaction from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Also, though, less than an hour from now, here's what we're watching to unfold live on Fox News. Democratic Congressman John Conyers is set to hold a news conference. Remember, he went home to Michigan yesterday, or day before yesterday, was hospitalized for a short term, and now he's going to hold a news conference. House Democrat Nancy Pelosi called on Conyers to resign amid allegations of sex harassment and a secret payout to one of his accusers. We'll bring you that live.
Members of Congress who commit these egregious acts or congressional staffers should not be allowed to hide behind closed doors, anonymity, and these non-disclosure agreements while taxpayers have essentially been forced to pay for their misconduct.